Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has finally been laid to rest.
This was a unique historic moment, arriving in a country that had suffered terrible impact of the war.
Who is in control in Iran today? Who is running the show?
They are determined to move on and determined to ensure that they have a place in the world. Nothing which suggests that things are as the Western media was showing.
Are you still apprehensive that whether we still have a friend in Iran?
Somewhere deep inside there must have been a little disappointment. Do you have some confidence in yourself or not? Do you believe that the President of the United States also needs you, or you're just looking for charity from him? Well, Italy's done it, Canada has done it, the NATO countries have done it, France has done it. Why, if all those countries can do it, why can't we?
Critique of Mr. Jaishankar that because he's trying to be a politician, so the nuances of foreign policy are getting lost.
I understand that. Trying to be a politician is different from being a politician.
Is India today really strategically autonomous?
Mr. Bajpayee was the head of the delegation and I was his deputy head. We went to the Human Rights Commission. Iran stood by us in that very critical, crucial vote. We've forgotten that. We need to sustain friendships, we need to sustain relationships with all these countries involved. But there's a difference between narrow self-interest and enlightened self-interest.
Why should we need to choose Iran over Israel?
They've drawn a line and said, thus far, no further. It's just simple, they don't understand foreign policy. That ethics and morality has been given a go-by entirely.
Hello and a warm welcome. You're watching the Foreign Policy Dialogue with me, Smita Sharma. This is the podcast where we take a deep dive view of what's happening globally, the events which absolutely impact our lives. And I have a very special guest here with me today who needs no introduction, Mr. Salman Khurshid, the former Foreign Minister, the former Law Minister of India, a very senior Congress leader, currently also somebody who's heading the party's foreign policy cell. And why I speak to him today is, of course, the events that keep us all glued to our television screens, to our mobile screens that are happening in the Gulf. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has finally been laid to rest. The burial ceremony that took place in Mashhad following a 6-day process where Mr. Khurshid was also in attendance as part of a delegation that went from India invited by Tehran. And while we record this podcast here on Friday, the 10th of July, that you get to watch on Sunday, in the next 2 days itself, events could take a very sharp turn for the worse, and perhaps we might as well just see a full-blown resumption of the war again between Iran and the United States, given the fresh spate of military escalation that we have seen over the past 48 hours. Mr. Khurshid, many thanks for joining me here.
Pleasure.
Before I speak about, the war, India's choices in West Asia, give us a sense of your visit to Tehran, of what you saw, of the experiences that you had while there.
Well, it was quite overwhelming because this was a unique historic moment. Arriving in a country that had suffered such terrible impact of the war, having lost their supreme leader, somebody who led them spiritually, led them politically, etc. There was an enormous sense of discovery by looking at how matter-of-fact people were. There was enormous participation, but we didn't actually participate in the processions that happened. They'd kept events for us separate so that we could focus on the events in which we were to speak and convey the messages that we were bringing to them, events in which we paid obeisance and went for what was called the final farewell to the great leader. Visited sites in Tehran, including the residence of the late Ayatollah Khamenei. So we looked around, and the sense of people that we met and the conversations that we had made it very clear that there's incredible resilience and sense of confidence amongst those people, and tremendous discipline. I mean, for managing lakhs and lakhs of people in those 3-4 days that we were there, that itself was really remarkable. It didn't look like a war-torn country. That is the important thing. We were told the targets that had been, the places that had been targeted, for instance, the headquarters of television and radio, but we didn't see any damage as such. It obviously worked very hard and covered up everything very quickly. But it looked like a country with people who mean business. They are determined to move on and determined to ensure that they have a place in the world. That was quite remarkable.
To the outside world, there is a lot of intrigue about Iran as to who is running the country right now. The successor, Mujtaba Khamenei, he has not been present during this state funeral ceremony, citing security reasons. There is a lot of Western media speculation whether it's a more hardline IRGC that today is in control. And then the politically stated goals initially of Donald Trump, that there is a lot of dissent, anger against the regime, is what how the Americans and the Western world describes the government in Iran, that people were out there on the streets protesting in January. What is the sense that you come back with? Who is in control in Iran today? Who is running the show? And what about the sentiments of people on the streets?
Well, it seemed like business as usual. I mean, we met with the gentleman who heads the Interfaith Committee, for instance, and they had speeches from people who'd come from different backgrounds, different countries, Central Asian, African, South Asian, people who represented different religions, etc. But they wasn't looking over the shoulder that, we'll do this later, or can we keep this for some other time. It was fairly open conversations that were happening there. And I was particularly impressed by the fact that many of the professionals who were dealing with us, including photographers and media people, many of them were young women. And they were, of course, hijab covered, etc. Everybody was in mourning, so that you didn't see anything but black color as far as clothes were concerned. But I even saw people on scooters, I saw people traveling, I saw people in the hotel lobbies who were people who were dressed normally, women who were dressed normally. And they didn't seem that whatever we've heard about the oppressive nature of the regime and how women are kept behind a veil and so on, didn't see that at all. I mean, I saw an extremely confident, comfortable atmosphere that one saw. Now, 3 days perhaps is too little, and they were orchestrated and programmed to go into deep discussions with individuals who were dealing with any dimension of the government. We didn't, of course, meet any senior IRGC personnel. Presumably, they were also, for security reasons, keeping themselves away. But there were a lot of leaders. I met the president. I had a short chat with the president. He was quite open. He met with everybody. He made a very stirring speech. And all the senior ayatollahs who were there, who participated, there were countries like, even Saudi Arabia was represented. They sent a delegation. They were represented. Now, of course, much of that happened separately. Those of us who were private invitees or delegations, we were taken first separately. And then the official delegations, including the one from India, they then went to the same place where the bodies were kept, etc., to pay their respects, etc. But the exposure that we were able to get in terms of talking to the media and ordinary people was absolutely remarkable. Nothing which suggests that things are as the Western media was showing.
Absolutely, and millions of people, that sea of people, whether it was the Grand Khamenei Musalla, whether it was the holy city of Qom where prayers took place, or when the procession passed through Karbala, Najaf in Iraq, and finally that burial ceremony in Mashhad, of course. And all throughout, everything seemed to be, as Mr. Khurshid said, so disciplined. So these are visuals that really have sort of shown a very different Iran in the face of war, in the face of the tough negotiations that it continues to be a part of, or the negotiations remain suspended, and also a military escalation happening just as in fact the final burial process was taking place. Now you mentioned the Indian delegation, Mr. Khurshid, which comprised of the Lieutenant General retired Syed Ata Hasnain, the Governor of Bihar, and also, of course, Minister of State for External Affairs, Mr. Pavitra Margarita. There has been a lot of debate in India that India should have sent a higher representation. Now, in 1989, during Mr. Khomeini's state funeral, it was a Minister of State from the government which had represented. During Mr. Raisi's funeral, it was the then Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar who represented India. What are your thoughts on this entire debate, that should there have been a higher representation from the Indian side?
Well, I think it's important for you to know that right through, before we left from here and we were briefed by the Iranian side, the Ayatollah's special representative in Delhi and the ambassador gave us very, very comprehensive briefing about how things would be when we got to Tehran. I didn't come across even a momentary acrimony, disappointment, or a sense of being let down. They were very generous in their approach, and I think that was the attitude that one came across there in Tehran itself. But somewhere deep inside, there must have been a little disappointment, that because they kept repeating that, we have a very special civilizational relationship. They kept repeating that without actually running down anybody else to say they are no good, they are no good. So of course, you've talked about the slogans, etc., that were repeated at the main processions, but not in our presence. That didn't happen in our presence. So I think the decency and the courtesy with which they received us, and they didn't even sort of say that we are happy with you, we're not happy with the official delegation, etc. But if I'm not mistaken, we got a higher media profile in Tehran than the official delegation did, and I think the official delegation may have been there for a very short while. They made their appearance and they left. I don't know whether that was inevitable or that was intended. I'm not quite sure about that. But clearly they expected more from us, but that they didn't complain was an interesting thing, because I believe that they want to continue with a good relationship with India, and they treat India as being extremely important for their worldview. And I hope that the government of India will take that into account.
Because in an interview to Karan Thapar in the early days of the war, you were very apprehensive whether India still has a friend in Iran, given that India had not condemned the killing of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Of course, since then, much water has flown under the bridge. There was also the killing of the Minab schoolgirls. There was the killing of the Iranian sailors on board Iris Dana, that too in the Indian Ocean strategic region by the US submarines. So are you still apprehensive that whether we still have a friend in Iran, or has the relationship, it's not become acrimonious, but there's been a substantial change?
Well, I would imagine, in one of my conversations with a very important figure, when I actually squarely asked this question, the response I got was, well, there was a phase before the war and there was a phase after the war, and things are very different. Now, you could take it in any context, that you can take it in any manner, etc. But clearly, they don't want to make an issue. They want us to have a good relationship to carry on. But certainly, there would be some expectation. What we've done, and I repeat what I said at that stage when I first gave that interview, I repeat that there would be expectations, and the weeks and months from now, those expectations will have to be satisfied. To some extent, they'll have to be satisfied. We've taken a very standoffish position, if you like, if I describe it as a standoffish position. We've turned a blind eye towards their suffering, etc. We've obviously not been able to do a great deal. We could have, I believe that considering our relationship with them and with all the other countries that were involved in this conflict, including Israel and the United States of America, plus the kind of relationship we have with the Russian Federation, with President Putin, we have a little sort of uneasy relationship with China. But given that we have relationships in that region and with the various parties involved, there was a role for India that could have been more positive, and I didn't see that role. Now, whether the consequences of not exercising that role are immediate or mid-term or long-term, we'll only know with passage of time, we'll know. But I wish and I hope that the government will do what it thinks is at least the minimal that's required to sustain this relationship with Iran.
When you say that India's role could have been a bit more positive, are you pointing to the fact that India could have perhaps played a role towards mediation or as an interlocutor? Mrs. Sonia Gandhi, of course, has penned articles in newspapers. She wrote one in March, she wrote one last month as well, and a scathing attack on the government for its silence on Palestine, on the Iran war, which is a clear breach of the United Nations, in fact, articles and charters. So do you feel India could have been more proactive in terms of an interlocutor?
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely see no reason why India should have kept itself out. Not just here, not just in the conflict with Iran, but even the earlier situation in Gaza and Palestine, as you just said, Mrs. Sonia Gandhi has talked in her several articles, she's talked very, very specifically about it. I think we just decided to keep a low profile and not say anything so that we don't appear to be taking sides. It was not a matter of taking sides.
But we did appear to be taking sides, right?
But I'm afraid we did. I mean, if you go to one country on the eve of their assaults on another country, unless you say, look, I made a mistake, that becomes taking sides. But be that as it may, what do you need to do beyond now? If we have friendship, who says give up the friendship? Certainly the Congress party doesn't say that you give up the friendship with anybody. We need to sustain friendships, we need to sustain relationships with all these countries involved. But if you cannot tell a friend that they are wrong, then what is a friendship for? Now, the trouble with our foreign policy today is that we look only at transactional value. Can we get a transaction here? Can we get something here in return? And the ethical and moral element of foreign policy, which has always been from Gandhiji's time and a very critical part of India's foreign policy, we've given that up completely. And that would cost us the stature that we had in the world. Of course, we have a market, and that market will continue to draw people. But the respect that people held India in, that respect is going to be impacted.
I mean, the counter argument persistently over the past few years has been that, look, everybody is looking out for their own national interests. You are dealing with a US president in Donald Trump who is absolutely unpredictable, who creates a lot of problems for friends and foes alike. A lot of our MSMEs here, their backs are already broken because of the high tariffs that were slapped on India. India's considerations in the Gulf states, where we have such a strong and a large scale diaspora, nearly 1 crore, and that has been cited as a constant reason for India not condemning any of the action by Israel and America, but at the same time constantly naming Iran in its condemnation of any of the strikes that have happened in the Gulf Arab states. So is this really realism, that as the government says that we are being realistic about what we're doing?
You're being pragmatic. You may call it realist, you may be being pragmatic, you're being selfish. self-interest is part of foreign policy. Nobody can doubt that. But there's a difference between narrow self-interest and enlightened self-interest. Now, that is the critical distinction this government is unable to make. And I just therefore think that ethics and morality has been given a go-by entirely. Now, I'm not saying that you should be 100% ethics and morality. If you can be, wonderful, because that gives you a very special standing and stature in the world. But at least the right kind of mix, an objective mix of pragmatic politics and ethics and morality is something that we would expect. Now, you have a difficult situation. I don't doubt that you have a difficult situation in dealing with the President of the United States. But do you have some confidence in yourself or not? Do you believe that the President of the United States also needs you, or you're just looking for charity from him? He needs you. He knows that. And you also know that he also needs to put an end to this war. He's not doing it out of charity. He's not doing it out of being good to Iran and just being decent with Iran. He's doing it because there is fatigue in his own country. In the MAGA crowd, there's a fatigue that they don't want this war, right? And a lot of people who now think that this war is being thrust upon the United States of America because of Israel, etc. So that's an important question. Now, given whether we had an option to do something else, well, Italy's done it, Canada has done it, the NATO countries have done it, France has done it. Why, if all those countries can do it, why can't we? They're also dependent on the United States of America in many ways, and particularly as far as NATO is concerned. But they've stood their ground. They've drawn a line and said, thus far, no further. Now, when the Americans have said, you have to give us your bases, you have to give us your support, the United Kingdom also said, sorry, we are not going to join you in this. And I think that's the messaging they've done even at the NATO gathering. So who finally took a step backwards? It was President Trump who took a step backwards. President Trump may be whimsical, President Trump may be an eccentric, President Trump may have his own view of the world, and he's an important person who will obviously be always taken seriously for what he does and what he says. But you can't just give up your ground entirely. You have to make a stand somewhere and then see whether President Trump will accommodate you or not.
You know, when the entire row with the United States erupted over our diplomat Devyani Khobragade, we saw how the UPA government sort of really stood up to the United States. The then administration drew some red lines. Today, if you were the External Affairs Minister, the late Dr. Manmohan Singh was here, what do you think could have been differently done? You know, especially when it came to dealing with somebody, again I'm repeating, Mr. Donald Trump is not a Mr. Biden, he's not a Barack Obama.
Sure, I understand, absolutely, and you know, you can't be blind to that fact. You have to take the ground situation in a practical way and deal with it in a practical way. But what stops us from telling President Trump or President Putin or Mr. Netanyahu or anybody else that, look, we think that you're right here, but we think you're wrong here? I mean, what about Ukraine and Russia? We have a very important relationship with Russia, very important relationship, and I think we all believe in this country that that relationship has to be sustained and has to be supported. They have been good to us in difficult times, and then we are still in many ways economically, politically linked with them. So fine, let's give them priority, but give them priority to say, look, do you take us seriously? Can we suggest that please do this and don't do this? Don't go as far as you're going.
I mean, we didn't even condemn the Russian invasion, Mr. Modi. Only in SCO said that this is not the era of war.
But this is not an era of war, an era of war which we are fighting ourselves. After saying there's no era of war, we are fighting a war ourselves. And then we are saying that, look, we didn't stop the war. We stopped the war because our objectives were met, etc., etc. Now, the point is inconsistency of positions that we take in the world. Something for others and something for ourselves will have to be wrong. When we say that you don't do this, you must stop here, go back to the negotiating table, then we should do the same, shouldn't we? Go back to the negotiating table, or else explain why our case is different. And there is many ways of saying our case is different, There is a possibility of doing that. But have we talked anywhere at all? Have we taken any initiative is the big question.
Why is it so? Do you think is it?
I just think they don't understand foreign policy. This is just simple. They don't understand foreign policy. It's too mixed up with the idea of domestic policy, etc. The world watches.
The foreign minister is somebody for whom, foreign policy strategy is a legacy.
I know it is, but he's not a politician. He doesn't understand politics. He doesn't understand politics, and that too very complicated politics of the BJP right now with a prime minister like Mr. Modi. Now, somebody who came from a political background with some understanding of foreign policy, as has happened so often in the past in our country, they might have been able to deal with it better. But just simple tactical foreign policy propositions, not good enough, I'm afraid. And I'm not quite sure that the traditional standard format that is used by the Indian diplomat is comfortable with what is happening.
In fact, it's interesting what you are saying, because I am hearing a different critique of Mr. Jaishankar, that because he is trying to be a politician, so the nuances of foreign policy are getting lost.
I understand that. Trying to be a politician is different from being a politician. So if you're a politician, then you're a politician intrinsically. If you're trying to be a politician, then you're emulating somebody, may not necessarily be truly politics. But this is not for us to analyze his persona and his character, etc. The point really is we have to look at outcomes. And let's ask ourselves, let the government ask itself, are you satisfied with the outcomes that you've had? We could have done much better. But as I said, Iran was considerate, Iran was charitable, Iran was very fair in terms of what Iran did with our ships as far as Hormuz was concerned. After what happened to their own ship, unarmed ship, very close to the Indian waters, after that they could have been much more difficult, but they weren't. In fact, they were reaching out to give India an opportunity that other countries were seeking, also saying that if you give it to India, why not to us, etc. Then of course the Hormuz got more complicated because of the United States embargo and so on. But the fact is that they didn't hold back anything that they could do for us, but we did hold back on things that we could do for them.
Do you feel today that perhaps, when you look back at the terms of whether it was Prime Minister Vajpayee, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, we may not have been as much a big economy as we are today. Our purchase powers were lesser then, but did we have more confidence, more security, or is it that the whole world has changed, and because of the changed realities we are changed today?
Why Prime Minister Vajpayee and Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh? Go back to Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. What did he have? We were just independent. We have nothing of the economic structure that we have today. Absolutely nothing. And didn't stop him from going to the Bandung conference and leading the NAM movement. He did it, and he was a voice, he was heard, and people cherished him. Then Indira Gandhi came, and Indira Gandhi was cherished in the whole world, and then followed other prime ministers, etc. So today we have a lot more going, and therefore you have an advantage today. You could have done more, perhaps even greater outreach than was done by prime ministers who were constrained by economics and so on. But we don't see that at all. Unfortunately, we don't see that at all.
I mean, we are constantly buying so much of defense weapons today, not just from Russia, but from Israel, from the United States. So, and this government has that problem with the non-aligned movement policy and vision of Mr. Nehru. Strategically autonomous is the word that they constantly use for their vision. Is India today really strategically autonomous?
Well, good question. They also say strategically autonomous, but in a multipolar world, multi-aligned. Now, I've never understood what multi-aligned means. That I'm aligned to a lot of people. So, if you align to a lot of people, what happens between one alignment and another alignment? I mean, you know people, you work with people, you'll have to work with people, you have to work with the entire world. That doesn't mean that you're aligned to them. The very thought of alignment itself is unacceptable to traditional Indian thinking. And I'm afraid that saying multi-alignment, multipolarity is understandable, that's something that you can't do anything about, that just is an organic thing that happens. But you are multi-aligned. You are dealing with the multipolar world, understandable. But that you are multi-aligned makes no sense at all. Who are we aligned to?
That's a very important strategic
point. When you say you are multi-aligned, who are you aligned to?
Are you pivoting as an ally to a certain
Absolutely,
camp?
absolutely. So I think there's just complete and utter confusion in their thinking. And where it emanates and why it is happening is a question that scholars have to look at.
So just the last three questions. One, of course, Mr. Modi, who still enjoys an immense amount of popularity in the country. The BJP's base has grown much stronger since the time that it came into power in 2014. And large sections of their supporters today will still ask that why should we need to choose Iran over Israel? And Israel is a country that, of course, as Mr. Narasimha Rao, who initiated the ties that warming up with Israel happened during Mr. Manmohan Singh's time, especially post Mumbai attacks. There was so much of counter-terror cooperation, homeland security cooperation, joint defense missile research programs that were initiated. So this argument that why should India give more weightage, what purpose does Iran serve? We speak about the civilizational ties, but what purpose does Iran serve in our current scenario of things and over Israel and America?
See, the point is, are you going to wait to be better friends of Iran for up to a point where Iran actually becomes a nuclear power? Today, nobody wants Iran to be a nuclear power. At least the consensus today, whether it's in Europe, elsewhere in the world, is that Iran should not be a nuclear power. And what Iran is saying is that please, we must be secure. And I think they don't have to argue that case anymore about their security. We've seen what has happened to them, etc. Nobody speaks of the nuclear weapons that we are told are available as far as Israel is concerned. Nobody talks about that. Now, isn't that hypocrisy that you don't talk about nuclear weapons and missiles that Israel has, but you talk about possibility of nuclear weapons and certainly missiles that Iran has? Now, somebody has to be objective and say, if this is not right, if Iran should not have it, Israel shouldn't have it either. Shouldn't somebody do that? And who else can do this but a country like India? Now, the point is that India might say that this is strategically important for us because we are getting our weapons and we are getting intelligence systems and we are getting spooking systems from Israel. But then why? Israel is a little country and it can make all this, and India is such a vast country, Vishwaguru, and we can't make all this. We can make the BrahMos, but we can't make whatever else we are buying from Israel. So there are many questions. We became friends with Israel because we believed this was also an element of non-alignment, that you don't exclude anyone. You don't become a camp follower of anyone, but you don't exclude anyone. And why should we not accept the reality and move forward when the Arab countries were accepting that reality? I mean, look at the relationship of some Arab countries with Israel. Look at UAE, for instance, with Israel. So, as far as we were concerned, we were with Palestine, but we were with Palestine along with all the Arab countries, and the Arab countries were accepting the new reality of Israel. The idea was that include Israel in the conversation so that we can get a permanent settlement as far as Palestine is concerned. That's where India was involved. And then suddenly India got up and left and said, now you do whatever you like, I am friends with Israel. That's not acceptable.
Is that political? Because, you know, the stance that Iran took when the Babri Masjid demolition in 1992 happened, the stance that Iran took when the abrogation of Article 370 happened. So is there a sort of a more political comfort with the idea of Israel, also given the BJP's worldview when it comes to, not worldview, but, you know, its own political views on Indian Muslims, and a discomfort with Tehran over these past sharp political memories for the BJP?
There may be that you have a disappointment with Iran on something, but we must not forget when we went, Mr. Bajpayee was the head of the delegation and I was his deputy head. We went to the Human Rights Commission. The issue was human rights violations in Kashmir, in Jammu and Kashmir. Iran stood by us. Iran stood by us in that very critical, crucial vote. We've forgotten that. When Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee was there, it was critical. We could have lost that vote, but it was critical that Iran stand by us, and Iran stood by us. And Iran persuaded several other countries to stand by us at that time. So we've forgotten that. We can have a point, if we disagree with Iran on nuclear weapons, Iran can say that, look, you have a nuclear weapon of yours and you're against nuclear weapons for us. They can say that, but at least there's a conversation. So if they disagreed with us on something, at least there can be a conversation for us to say why what happened has happened. There's a disagreement, and there was a disagreement in our country about the Babri Masjid. Matter went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court finally settled it to the best of its ability. They settled it. Now, before the Supreme Court settles it, why should Iran having necessarily accepted one side or the other? So there was an issue that had arisen, and that issue went beyond the borders of our country. We could have talked about it. There's no problem. We could have talked about it just as they can talk to us about nuclear weapons. After all, we have to take a position. If America says Iran must not have nuclear weapons, we can also have a position on whether they should have nuclear weapons or not. Now, India is against nuclear weapons across the globe. Across the globe. Rajiv Gandhi's action plan for elimination of nuclear weapons, you remember, was presented to the United Nations. But we still have a nuclear weapon. And why do we have a nuclear weapon? And we've just deployed 12 of them. We have nuclear weapons for this reason, that we've said our neighborhood has nuclear weapons and it's an unstable neighborhood. Therefore, we need to protect ourselves, and our first allegiance and first responsibility is for the people of India and their security. That's why we have it. At least this is something which allows the conversation. But to say, I won't tell you, you can't do this, I can do it, I'm different from you, that's not the way you deal with the world.
So India will be hosting the BRICS summit meeting later this year. Prime Minister Modi held his third telephonic conversation with President Pezeshkian, in fact, just a day before you left for Tehran. And in BRICS already we have seen this war cast a deep shadow. There is China, Russia, all of them who have sided with Iran thoroughly. There are the differences emerging between UAE, Saudi, all of that. And is India isolated within the BRICS? Is BRICS a good opportunity for India to course correct firmly with its ties on Iran?
Well, provide the leadership. We have the leadership today, formally the leadership with us. But substantive leadership is what India must provide. India can't just sit there and watch what others are doing. India has to maneuver, India has to steer, India has to persuade, India has to get people together and then be seen as the true leader of the BRICS movement. That's how India has always seen itself. That's how people have seen India, and that's what's expected of India, and I hope that India will do it.
So, final question. Prime Minister Modi in Indonesia stating it very clearly that India still believes in the traditional two-state solution for Palestine. But Mr. Netanyahu in his recent remarks have made it very clear that there is no space for that. Do you think that the two-state solution still holds good? And how does the world deal with Mr. Netanyahu and his, his entire government is so far right now, whether it's Mr. Katz, whether it's Mr. Ben-Gvir, how does the world and India deal with that?
Well, there are many imponderables. The war ends. What happens to Mr. Netanyahu at the next election? I mean, we know that he's not coming back. Whoever's coming back, he's not coming back.
Whoever's coming back could be even more hardline than him.
Maybe so. But we'll have to see that. The point is that when there is possibility of change, then there's a possibility of laying out things afresh. But he will not stay. He seems to have a personal commitment that he will not allow a two-state solution to happen. Now, let's ask ourselves, if no two-state solution, then no Palestine. Isn't it? Then there's no Palestine. Then there's only one country, and that's Israel. Now, who will accept one country solution where there is this vast population who claim, rightly so, that they have been uprooted from their traditional family homes and traditional properties to be pushed out, to be living as refugees? That's bad enough. And then comes people who've been just completely destroyed and whose homes have been demolished, their lives have been destroyed in Gaza. And to say that no two-state solution means what? It means that you just put bulldozers in entire of Palestine and then have a dream castles built that we are now hearing about the possibility of real estate development. It's nothing short of absurd, nothing short of pathetic. There's a human tragedy in Gaza. There's a human tragedy now, and we see it play out every day. And that human tragedy has to be addressed. The world has to once for all say, we cannot but have two-state solution. And the two-state solution itself is not easy, but that two-state solution will come after the rehabilitation and the facilities that are urgently needed of education, of health, of basic housing, etc., is first provided to the people of Gaza.
And the Israeli occupation of West Bank.
That, of course, I mean, if that remains, you can't do anything at all.
Okay, I think this was a conversation that I definitely enjoyed, Mr. Khurshid, and I have a lot of food for thought. I'm hoping that the audience will have too. Thank you so much. I know
My pleasure. Thank you very
came
much.
back. You've not had time to rest, but thanks for having this conversation.
Okay.
And for all those who tuned in, do share your feedback. Thanks for watching. Goodbye and take care.